When you were a sex worker, was there something specific that drew you to this? Like, hey, this needs to be more attention paid to this, or you think you could get?
No, I came to it inadvertently where I had an RFID company. So this is the business side of things. So not sex work at all, but I had a startup. So radio frequency identifiers, the technology on the wristbands that are at conferences, ironically, and trade shows that do access control and cashless payments and analytics. And I was living in the States illegally. I didn't have a worker's visa. We're trying to run this company, and I ran out of runway, so I couldn't pay people. So I'd always been really intrigued by sex and grew up in a pretty sexually repressed household. So the more you suppress and repress, the more you eroticize things. And I felt really compelled to sex work, and I knew it would solve all my problems if I could do it. And I said, I'm going to try it once, and if I'm okay with it, then I can keep building this company and it solves all my problems. And then if I'm not, I won't do it again. And so it wasn't meant to. I could have never anticipated that's where my career would end up going. But
Yeah.
this was, I never told anyone about it. And then I ended up being doxxed years later. And my experience was like I learned just so much about people. And men specifically would tell me things that they would never tell a partner, a therapist, a best friend. And then I met other, sex workers, and the insight that other women had in that community as well was just unmatched. It was kind of just like we were holding the world's best kept secrets. It was kind of like, a master's in psychology in a lot of ways. So I was fascinated by it, and I didn't feel shame. Um, and that was really interesting because, we're conditioned to feel shame. And I started just going down the rabbit hole of exploring again human behavior and where sexual shame comes from, and cultural influence, how that contributes to sexual shame. So then, yeah, I ended up being doxxed years later, and what I thought would be the end of my life, I just had this revelation of like, oh, this is the work that I'm supposed to do around actual sex positivity, and bringing awareness to that, and real sex education, and really embracing that holistically. So I went back to school. I became a sexologist, and yeah, I mean, I'll never stop learning there either. But what's really interesting, again, just to tie it back, is, we think that ever since the Girls Gone Wild era, that like this is liberation, this is sexual liberation. But like a sexual image and sexiness is not the same as like a positive sexuality, right? So my objective is really bridging the gap there. So it's really cool that these brands actually are looking to work with us, right? Because that's the missing piece. Selling sex is not the same.
And you mentioned you grew up in a sexually repressed household. Was there any sense of rebellion when you decided to try that type of work, or was it
Um,
just curiosity?
yeah, no, it was definitely a covert rebellion. I actually just wrote about this on my blog yesterday. Yeah, my mom was a social worker, and she was sexually abused as a child. So, that was her fear response. Of course, that's all she knew, but it was to protect me. It was like boys were bad. They only want one thing. It's unsafe. Sex is meant for only like true love. Of course, that's denying like the natural curiosity of a child, that like all children are innately, naturally, organically sexual. That's how, and pleasure feels good. So that's where shame usually develops. So um, I aligned with kind of the perfectionist ideal that my mother projected onto me. And then when I was around 14, I just split, and I completely rebelled against that. And I found it a lot more comforting to be the all knowing than known. So I would weaponize my sexuality and use it uh, as a form of control so others couldn't control me. Highly unaware I was doing that at the time, but I was a very shy and timid kid. So, boys didn't like me. I was bullied a lot. And then when I grew into my body, and I realized this could be a powerful tool, I used it. So it was my own journey of mistaking that sexual control and sexualizing myself for liberation, which was nothing to do with that. I didn't experience like a partner orgasm until a couple years ago because I compartmentalized that so exponentially.
Did something happen? Maybe it was when you experienced an orgasm that made you realize all of this? Or is there something specific, an incident in your life or something along the journey?
Um, I was always drawn to the what Jack Morin calls in his book The Erotic Mind, the negative aphrodisiacs. So I would get aroused by anxiety and fear and guilt and not supposed to. And the big thing that we don't realize is that we eroticize our trauma and our childhood wounds. So we take really benign incidents in our, formative years and we sexualize them. And, that's what humans do to process and alchemize, but there's no awareness to that. So then everyone thinks they're bad for their sexual proclivities. Um, so I was always weirded out. I felt really different, and that kept me very curious, and obviously is what drew me to sex work too. I was like, why am I drawn to the undercurrents and the taboo and the not supposed to? Um, and then I would seek relationships that I couldn't discern the difference between that and sex and that in relationships. So I would just find unhealthy partners that, demeaned me in the bedroom, but also out in the real world. And I was like, I had no awareness of this. So I just went on a quest of educating myself further and figured this out. And then when I was doxxed, I went through what I call like my um, sexual spiritual awakening, because you can't have one without the other, in my opinion. And because I pushed so much down, so much had been repressed. Um, when the thing that I feared the most happened, there was this freedom in that. And then that was the beginning of getting in touch with my body. So I started with the cerebral part of like, wow, the psychological, why we do what we do and where these comes from, the origin of our fantasy and desires and all of that. And then I was like, okay, now it's still up here. Like, what about feeling things? What about
Right.
feeling pleasure? And I had a partner who was a lot younger than me, and that it was after a breakup, and it was meant to be just like a fun kind of one-off thing. And because there was no pressure on the outcome, and I didn't need to be in control because it just was out of complete context, we started to explore things sexually that like I just didn't know I had the capacity for. Like, and inadvertently I realized that I was tapping into elements of Tantra. And so that became something that was very aligned with the spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And then I went down that track and still have continued to. And I had like a heartgasm, which I didn't
Yeah.
understand sexual reflexology, and that the cervix is connected to the heart, and a heartgasm isn't like a pleasure-filled thing in the way that we know it, but it's like an emotional cathartic release. So that was my big awakening, after I'd already figured out the psychological of, oh, here's why I do things that are bad. Then it was like, well, what else is available? What else can like our sexuality really and our eroticism really tap into? And after I had that experience with the partner and like really learning what um, is possible in terms of transformation in sex with another person, as well as exploring ourselves, that became like that was like the pivotal moment for me. And I'm here, I'm in Spain right now because I'm doing a 9-day Tantra training next week. So I never stop learning there. It's like, sexuality is vitality, it's life force.
The heartgasm, was that around the same time you learned, I hope I say this properly, the difference between having sex and intimacy? Or did that come in earlier?
I think I'm still learning that. I think it's, uh, there's a difference between being aware by definition and then really implementing the work. So at first it was quite frustrating because I knew what it was and I knew I was missing it. Um, and then, it's something that we all should continue to chip away at. None of us ever have the answers. None of us have ever done a complete reconciliation between sex and intimacy. A large part of what we eroticize is keeping the intimacy separate from sexuality a lot of the time. We see that in a lot of marriages. But in my opinion, from what I've seen, the goal is to merge the two. And that's not what am I trying to say? Not everyone has the capacity for that. And people's definition of intimacy ranges, exponentially. There's intellectual intimacy, there's emotional intimacy, there's sexual intimacy, physical intimacy, spiritual intimacy. So being able to define what that means to you and what that means to the people that you bring in your life. Also, intimacy doesn't have to be sexual at all. That was a big realization, right? I like to say the deepest intimacy some of us will ever know is with a friend, not with a partner. And that's okay too. It's not an all or nothing. I believe it's a both and.
Well, a sex intimacy coach. But is there something specific, like when you meet somebody for the first time and you can ask them some questions and kind of get an idea where you think you need to help them? Is there a specific part of them, I guess?
Well, they only come to me if they have something specific they want to work on. And typically we feel like our like not being able to have an orgasm or numbing out during sex or premature ejaculation or dependency on porn, we feel those are like problems in vain and issues in vain and that it's our fault and like it's not that important and it's fine, there's so many other bigger problems in the world. And it's just not true. It's like our relationship to our sexuality really dictates everything. And where we get honest with our sexuality, we're able to be honest with everything in life. So, um, as I said, like I work exclusively with men. It wasn't always like that, but my experience in sex work led me to that. So, I mean, a large part of what I work with is around the Madonna whore complex and that split that happens within men where they feel like they have to choose to be the good man or and then they have to abandon their sexual primal selves, and that really is the root, the origin of all sexual issues, of all intimacy and relational issues. So whether that is performance anxiety, whether that is premature ejaculation or delayed ejaculation, anorgasmia, infidelity, over reliance on porn, risky sexual behavior, compulsive thoughts. It's all rooted in that split where we feel like we have to choose. We can't be whole. So, and the framework that I've developed around that is psychosexual, spiritual. So we look at like all those elements. We can't heal one without, healing the others. And unfortunately, what we see in the medical community is like they just treat the symptom, and then in sex therapy, they're just looking at the psychological, and it's like it's really holistic. We need to approach these things holistically, and men are also more cerebral, so they want to make sense of things. They want to also optimize things, right? So when I work with men, I start with like the biological and the physiological assessments. And it's like, okay, well, what's your lifestyle like? What are your hormone levels like? What's your nervous system like? Nervous system regulation is huge. A big thing that a lot of people don't realize is we're only really we learn to experience pleasure in one way. That's how we're raised. So if you think about like a young boy, when he first learns to masturbate, how's he doing? He's doing it really quickly, um, really fast, one way. And he is in a high sympathetic nervous system arousal state because he's afraid that mom will walk in the room And that's why he's going really quickly. And more often than not, mom does walk in the room. So then that leads to shame around this. And then men learn to feel sensation only when they're in that state. Their nervous system acclimates to that state of like high excitement, high tension, stakes are high, right? So there's no awareness of slowing down and relaxed arousal. And they don't know what else is available to them sexually in terms of not only connection, but erogenous zones or like, like what else is available pleasure wise to them. And then that of course will reflect in their relationships actually to a partner. It's like why we have a lot of men that, especially young men that just do the jackhammer move, right? Because like that's all they've learned. And it's different for women because if you think about young women who, were on the in the parking lot growing up, I think about like myself in high school, learning to give a blowjob on a banana, right? And you're asking other girls how to do it and they're showing you. And you're asking, how do you please a guy, right? So it's interesting because women project out and it's all about people pleasing. So they experience less pleasure. Whereas men aren't taught to attune to women, it's the opposite because they're taught to suppress and repress. So it's like then you go on the flip side to the locker room. No, high schoolers are talking about like, what do I do to please a woman? And like it's all about accolades and like bragging. So and then also they're going since there's no discussion like there are with younger women and girls they just go straight to porn and that's all they learn from. So it's like we can't fault them for how they were conditioned. But the cool part about working with men over women and why I prefer it is because they're a lot more coachable. Like if you look at the biohacking culture, the health optimization culture that we live in, like wanting to be better, do better. Yes, that can be toxic at times, but if you apply that like work ethic to your relational skills, your intimacy skills, your sexual skills, then like that's pretty incredible. And women often think they know the answers, whereas men are constantly searching and looking to do better and be better.
And in your experience with men, are more intimacy issues, I'm sorry, are they more psychological than physical? Does everything begin psychologically?
Not everything. I mean, of course, there's tons of factors with anything from like a physical disability to, um, dysmorphic issue or hormonal issues and health. That's why I like to start there by screening. But generally, yes, if it's a chronic issue and it cannot be attributed back to a specific injury or illness or chronic illness, then yeah. And that's why it's the biopsychosocial spiritual framework that is so important, right? And how you do one thing is how you do everything. So interestingly, to your point, the same methodology that you use to treat premature ejaculation is used to treat delayed ejaculation, which is all about becoming attuning to the body, mindfulness, scanning, and slowing down. Always go as fast as the slowest part of you. So it's all the same framework, which is really interesting. And, this is what I'm trying to bring to the mainstream in terms of like brands and products in sexual health and wellness, because, there's more awareness now, but I don't believe in putting lipstick on a pig. I don't think it's like we shouldn't be using these sprays and pills and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there can be a place for those too, but again, it should be a both and we shouldn't start there. We should never start there. We should take agency back and become sexually sovereign and then pull in products, pull in help, pull in assistance as needed. But like let's see what we can find within ourselves.
And with intimacy issues with men, is that a confidence thing?
Um, it depends on the issue. Most men are avoidant, and it's very simple reason why they're avoidant. Again, because they're not allowed to express emotion when they're growing up. Um, so men learn to express emotion, or the only safe places for them to express themselves are in sports and in sex, right? So, um, interestingly too, so that can lead to a lack of confidence or an overconfidence. It's like, and a misinterpretation from women. And I think women need to do a better job of understanding that like a man's really looking to express himself through sex. A man's not looking to use you for sex. Like that's how he connects. In Tantra, a way to a woman's genitals is through her heart, and a way to a man's heart is through his genitals. So we both want the same things foundationally, connection wise, but we reach an impasse because our understanding of the opposite sex is just not there, right? We want love, we both want connection, we both want intimacy, but men start here up and we start
Yeah.
here down. And similarly, when we feel offended that a man is trying to get like sexual with us right away, a man feels like he's being like emotionally molested if we're like, tell us what you're thinking right now, tell us your feelings, like tell us everything immediately. Like that is very polarizing for him.
And with intimacy, does it matter how big a man's package is? Or is that strictly psychological?
It's all the data shows, plus my experience, that there is a threshold of like, okay, we're talking about the micro penis. Yes, that can matter, right? But in general, no, no. And women have what I like to be called, or what I like to call dick amnesia, like where it's like they're not remembering the size, the girth, the length. They're remembering how the man made them feel. And, the best fucking is mind fucking. And that's not in the toxic sense. It's just like it's stimulating the mind. So that's definitely like a porn conditioning that men have been told that, and that's what they've seen, that like that's the norm, and it's simply not the norm. But again, there is like a threshold. I hear that with women too, that they see vulvas in porn, and then that all this insecurity comes from them. But there's a lot more being done around diversifying that with women in terms of like, whether it's like art or coffee table books and just, female positivity and body positivity. But it's sad because there hasn't really been that awareness with men. So it's kind of still like sitting with the undercurrents with vast majority of men with their shame.
And I guess a good relationship, when it comes to sex, can there be sex and be intimacy and be separate? Or does the sex always have to be intimate?
I I don't think sex is ever casual. So like let's bring it back to that. I don't like to say that we always take on the energy of whoever we're with, whether that's conscious or subconscious.
Right.
Now, the other truth to that is the profane can be sacred. So you can have a one night stand and it can just be like meant to be that, right? And I like to think of sex as a language in and of itself. So I've certainly had this where I have not connected with someone on a date, like, and then sexually, it's like we are so in sync. We're speaking our own language that like is unmatched. And then I've had the opposite where it's like I really, really connect with someone on a date, and then sexually, it's like we're just not in sync at all. So in that way, yeah, absolutely, you can have intimacy. Depending on how you define intimacy, it's like, what does that experience mean to you? I think the important fundamental is that you have transparency and honesty and integrity. And then if you have that and your partner also has that awareness, then like the world is your oyster.
And then can swinging be good for a relationship or not good for a relationship because you're having sex or intimacy with another partner?
It's entirely subjective. It's entirely subjective. Unfortunately, I think in today's culture, we've gone from, the complete monogamy, frigid monogamy model to the polyamory, which is like don't ask, don't tell, to then poly is the answer to that's transcendence. And none of those are fundamental truths. It's completely subjective. I like the model of relationship anarchy, which is you get to design your relationship a la carte. So some people want polyamory because they want more emotional connection with a multitude of people, and others want more sexual. Some people want to share finances, others don't. For some people, seeing a partner once a week is plenty and they feel very connected. Others need to see and speak to their partners like several times a day. So the idea of swinging can also be under the umbrella of relationship anarchy. Like what is the underlying feeling of why you want that? Is it to experience something new? Is it to, if you're being honest with yourself, is it to meet someone new and you don't really want to be in that relationship? Or is it strictly based on sensation and arousal and excitement? Like, what is it that you're looking to explore? Like, get to the root of your sexual motives. And I have like a worksheet I like to use with that for clients that are looking to open up their relationship or explore, non-monogamous relationships. Is I do this sexual motivations exercise where it's like, okay, like let's look at that. Let's get really honest. And if this aligns, great. If it doesn't, like let's go even further. And what are the compromises here? Like for couples that want to have a threesome for the first time. Let's take an FFM threesome. Like if it's before they just go straight in, which a lot do, unfortunately, they're like, oh, and they'll make the mistake of like asking a friend, which I think is always a terrible idea. It's like, okay, well, what's the feeling that you want? Is it validation, or is it just like a one-off experience? Or do you want this to be a regular thing? Or is that going to be the new standard? So before you jump into like bringing a third in sexually, like, how do you feel if you're out together and like you watch your partner from across the room flirting with someone else? Does that get you excited, or does that make you really jealous and like enraged? So let's try that. Let's walk before we run.
And for you, intimacy, what's the most important thing? Is it communication?
Yeah, but communication is very nuanced because it can be implicit or explicit. I am someone that has tended to talk about things without feeling them. And I can talk about intimacy a lot, and then to bring it back to the body and slow down and be still with someone, and the ability to be silent with someone to really attune to them is equally as important as vocalizing things. Like you can't really have one without the other. You need both, right?
And I hope I say this right. Part of your thing was is it competitive of sexual dreams? I had a question about that. My question was, is there a difference between sexual dreams and sexual desires?
Oh, sexual fantasies and desires?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So a fantasy is the imaginative experience of something. And you don't need to live that out. That's not the primary objective of the fantasy. It's something you can go back to and it gets you excited, but you don't feel this impulse to experience it physically, emotionally in the real world. Desire is when you need to experience or feel compelled to experience that in the physical world. So a lot of people are not able to distinguish between the two at all. They conflate the two constantly, and they make themselves bad for the fantasies that they have. They think that means something about their morality, and it doesn't. Uh, and if it's something that does feel like an impulse to act upon, then there's guidelines, there's a framework to assess that, and to assess like, can you do that consciously, and why are you doing it? The thing that I find most exciting in the work that I do, which is the biggest de-shamifying element in what I work with men about, because they have a lot of repressed fantasies and desires. And it's giving them the liberation to understand where those fantasies and desires came from. So there's a few different ways that they develop. For example, resolution, which is, say you were abused by a parent and verbally abused. And then so in relationships, in sexual relationships, you actually look for praise, right? And that's usually a subconscious thing. So you go for the opposite. And then there's repetition without agency. So that means you were, again, abused by a parent, verbally abused, and then you seek partners, which is something that I would do. I was not abused by a parent, to clarify, my parents are amazing. But I was bullied, and you seek partners that replicate that. So it's like you feel aroused when, you are defamed, demeaned, bullied, and you don't know why. You don't know why you keep choosing these partners. There's no awareness of that. So that's repetition without agency. And then there's repetition with agency, which is when you're now aware that your sexual self, your sexuality is different than you as a human being, you as a moral, relational individual. So you can compartmentalize those in a healthy way, and you can ask for what you want in the bedroom and say, hey, this is what turns me on. Go nuts. You're allowed to call me XYZ, set the frame, set the scene, and know what it is, and know outside of that context, this is we're healthy relationally. So that's what, is really important. I wish more people understood that it's a lot more, there's a lot of sense making to be had when we dig deep on our sexual fantasies, desires, and proclivities. It's really the root and the origin of everything, from our, shadows to our attachment wounds to our early childhood trauma. So we get to the root of that, and the revelations that people have about themselves is wild. And then plus on the flip side of that, then your whole world opens up from a pleasure lens, from a sexual lens, and it's extremely liberating. So you're really healing like all parts of you and expanding your capacity for pleasure.
In your experience, if I'm starting a new relationship, what's a good point for me to bring up my sexual fantasies and my desires and all that without, maybe being too early in the relationship and freaking out the partner?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's something that you lead with on date one.
Right.
I do it, I like to bring it in a really playful way. So there is this quiz called the Erotic Blueprint, which Jaya, a sexologist, developed a few years ago. And she developed this quiz where you take this quiz and it tells you the 5 different sexual types, archetypes, essentially. So it's like the 5 love languages of sex. So there's energetic, which is you need this tension and this kind of push-pull energy. And then there's sexual, which is straight up penetration. There is sensual, which is, environment is really important. The sounds, the sense, everything. You need that to be just right. And then there's kink, which is psychological or physical or both. And then there is shapeshifter, which means you can, transcend any of those depending on your partner. You play off of that. So I find that to be a really, really fun gateway with a new partner to have this conversation because A, you're seeing if they are taking your bid in general. Like, don't you want a partner to be able to respond to and be curious about you? So that will be if they opt into that offer, then that means they're going to be curious about other things in your life too, not just sexually, right? You want a partner that's going to be in alignment with you and that wants to grow and explore with you. So it tells you that, and then you take this quiz and it's innocuous, so you're not like freaking them out. You're not getting into the granular of your fantasies and your desires and why you're that way because you're a child and blah, 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 blah. You're seeing like, what do you respond to and what do they respond to? And then you get to understand how they interplay with each other. So interestingly, I'm still leading energetic. I've always been leading energetic. And my last used to be sensual. Like my skin would crawl when I would hear sensual because I didn't have a good experience of sensual. I never had an experience of it. In my mind, it was like smooth jazz music and like parent sex. Like it wasn't like erotic to me. And then with a partner I had, he was an extremely sensual, slow, more vanilla, but it was so like hot and just the connection that we had. And so I became sensual as my second. So I'm energetic and then sensual. And he is now leading energetic and then second sensual. So it's really interesting to see how that interplays. Our sexuality is not fixed, it's fluid. So also allowing the wholeness of that to come up. But I really do think talking about it and sharing your fantasies and desires is important in connection, especially for long-term relationships. Like that's the deepest parts of yourselves. I mean, fantasy is one thing, but if it's a desire, that's definitely something you want to share with a partner.
And how do I say this? If someone wants to do something to please their partner that they may not necessarily be into doing themselves, is that a good thing intimacy wise, or I guess for a long-term relationship?
Well, I mean, I think it's relationships are a living, breathing thing. So I like to use the yes, no, maybe framework when talking about that. So if you take something like, prostate play, everything from prostate play to, threesomes to anal to bondage to whatever. With the yes, no, maybe model, you put this whole list on the table as well as how you like to be referred to in sex, what names are allowed to be called, what time of day you want to have sex, all of that. If you just if sex is just oral to you or how you interpret intimacy, and you put that all on the table. And then with your partner, you go through, is that a yes or is that a no or is it a maybe? If it's a no, then yeah, it's not fair to bring up in a relationship, and you have to go into the relationship with that awareness. And if that's not going to do it for you long term, then if that's a deal breaker for you, then that's a deal breaker for you, right? But you can't make your partner wrong for not wanting to do it if it is a hard no. Now, if it's a maybe, there's malleability there. And then you can explore that maybe. Okay, well, what makes it a maybe? Like, what about prostate play? Well, isn't it kind of gay? Like, well, okay, so it's not that they don't want to experience the pleasure, it's that they have this interpretation of what it means about them, right? So then you can dissect what those maybes are. But yeah, if it's something that's just innately against the person's willingness to do it, if it brings up trauma for them, if they have had a bad experience with it, if it's a hard no, it should absolutely stay a hard no unless they say otherwise and it turns into a maybe at some point. But you need to respect those boundaries of a partner.
And adult material versus intimacy, there's always seemed to have been like one is not good for the other. In your experience, is that true, not true? Can one help the other? Does one affect?
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally believe we've made adult a problem because we've pushed it down and made it so stigmatized and taboo, similar to all forms of sex work. We made it bad by not addressing it. Like sex isn't inherently bad, it's just our projections and the fear around sex. But unfortunately, that is the world that we live in, and it's a reality that we have to face. So I don't ever like an abstinence model or like a zero tolerance for porn policy. I like to explore and diversify using porn, for example. So if a client of mine has over reliance on porn, I'm like, okay, well, rather than being told that you need to go cold turkey and it's an either or, you have to choose. Like before we do that, let's do some embodiment practices, some arousal tracking, and let's also try things like just listening to porn instead of just not like just shutting the
Right.
computer. And then what happens is we'll rupture and then we'll go back to it and we'll be like, well, fuck, I've already fucked the whole thing up. So it's pointless and I'm a bad person. I'm bad and no one's going to be able to love me. So try listening to it. Try watching different types of porn. So if you're only used to watching, biracial gangbangs, let's try watching, swingers, couples, love making, and like, let's try some of these ethical porn sites. I'm a big advocate for those to see what like real sex is like versus porn. So let's diversify and see what comes up for us emotionally and physically. And then that will give us something to work with. And that also liberates the client, which is most likely, more than likely the male, and bringing awareness to why he responds the way he does. And then it becomes a choice. Sexuality, and their response to it becomes a choice rather than a compulsive behavior.
And when you find out your partner is watching adult material, is that perceived as being an intimacy issue, or is that a trust issue? Is that a communication issue? Is that
Entirely contextual to the relationship. I mean, if they're not having sex and one of the partners is wanting to have sex, and then you know, she's finding him watching porn instead and he won't have sex with her, yeah, that's an issue. If they're content in their sex and intimate life, then I don't really see how that is an issue, right? And what moral meaning are you placing on it? Also, what were the agreements in the relationship? This stuff is important to talk about before you commit exclusively. Like, is that cheating to you? For some people, that's cheating. For me, that's not cheating. I've also never experienced, a lack of sex in my relationships, and I've felt satisfied there. So if that changed and they were going to porn, I'd be like, yeah, what does that mean about the relationship? It's symbolic. It's a reflection of the relationship. Or if the relationship is it a good place, then like, what is the harm when your partner's at work and, you are feeling aroused for some extra stimulation? Or if you're curious about something too, right? I think anything that becomes compulsive can never be good, but it's like I use the food analogy for porn and for sex in general. Sometimes we really crave McDonald's. Sometimes we really want a Big Mac. And it's all we can think about, and then we get that Big Mac and it's like it tastes so good, it's amazing, and as soon as we're done we feel sick. We're like, oh, did I really need that? I feel gross. But guess what, the next day you're going back to eating your salads. And it's other days you really crave a Michelin star experience. And this is where planning sex comes in. If you're planning like a Michelin experience, you've got to make a reservation, so you have to plan for that. A lot of excitement and planning goes into every little detail of that. And then it's this layered, multi-dimensional, euphoric experience. And that's like similar to some sexual experiences and like making love. But guess what? Everything is in moderation. We're not going to have Michelin every day. We're not going to have McDonald's every day. We're going to have salads most of the time. And we're going to allow ourselves to experience the full lexicon of our sexuality.
In terms of a long-term relationship, is there anything specific men may need to know to keep the intimacy, I guess, interesting?
I mean, it doesn't start in the bedroom. Like that's really important. Because of porn, men think that uh, sex is skill-based predominantly. Um, that could not be further from the truth. It's about attuning to your partner energetically. The foreplay and the arousal starts outside of the bedroom for a woman. Again, it goes to the mind. It starts in her mind. Men are wired differently. Men are single cued where they can see a set of great tits and feel aroused. Women's arousal starts in the mind. So the biggest thing that I would say is like holding space for all parts of her and really attuning to her emotionally as well, because if she feels safe, if she feels trust with you, then she can let go and get out of her mind. And that's where the most exciting experience of her sexually lies, is if you can make her feel safe enough to get out of her brain, not in asking her, oh, do you like it when I do it with 2 fingers versus 3? Or like, how's this? How about we switch positions? Why don't we try this position tonight? Don't take an inventory of skills or positions or any of that. Make her feel safe and attuned to her. And honestly, that's where the most exponential erotic experiences lie.
And for you, how will AI affect intimacy?
Oh, I mean, there's so many ways it can go. I think it's probably going to go down the Black Mirror trajectory of bypassing intimacy, frankly. We're seeing that happen with ChatGPT. Um, you know, what people don't realize about, I'll just use ChatGPT for example, is that, we're training it to respond even objectively how we want to be responded to. And we need real world dyadic relationships to be in a relationship. This is why having traditional therapy with another person is necessary over talking to a computer, because with a real person, tension arises, discomfort shows up, people get it wrong, and that goes with therapists as well, right? Like ChatGPT will just acclimate to even your objective self. But you need to feel the presence of a person, a living, breathing person, to get that pushback. or else real intimacy isn't going to be possible. So, I mean, the only case I would argue for that there are some benefits is for those that don't have the same access as the vast majority. And that doesn't mean laziness. We hear a lot about the male loneliness epidemic, but that's because, it's everyone thinks it's like porn is the predominant issue. It's not. It's dating apps. It's dating apps and it's video games, and the research reflects that. So, when we go to the grocery store, we're all on our phones, we're not looking at porn. We're swiping. So men no longer have a rejection capacity like they once did. I remember I was talking about this with a girlfriend earlier today. Like all thinking about ex-boyfriends growing up, they'd always say, "Oh, it's a numbers game." Like, why are we dating? Because like you said yes, basically. And rejection wasn't personal, especially if you hardly know someone. If you ask a woman out, for starting in high school, or at the mall or whatever, and she says no, okay, well, all right, she doesn't really know me, so that's fine. She's saying no to, but like, that's fine. I'm going to go on the next one. And until someone really knows me, it's how can it even be personal? So we don't have that callousness anymore, that tolerance that we used to, and that's where AI is extremely insidious. So the only way I'd see that as a positive is for those that don't have the same access. So we're looking at those that are like that have, more physical disabilities or mental disabilities, in which case I still don't prefer AI because there is surrogate partner therapy and sexological body work and things that I think need to be at the forefront for the minority communities that or individuals that don't have the same access to intimacy that the rest of us able-bodied people do. But there is some evidence and data that shows that AI can be conducive to connection where it otherwise wouldn't be available.
My thought was, when you go to Pornhub, for sake of discussion, you're looking for something specific. AI is going to change that to, I want a 6-foot blonde with small boobies and a nice butt to do this, this, and this. And it's kind of just changed the whole discussion because I don't have to look anymore.
Yeah.
And now when I'm used to having it all the time and I go to the mall and I see a pretty girl, she's not going to meet that image in my head. That makes any sense.
Yep. I mean, that's already happened with porn and with, there's an AI. And if we look at like in China, there's the sex robots and other places in China, but it's pretty prevalent there. And teenage boys can't get aroused naturally in the real world. And that's why, like sex for Gen Z has gone down exponentially, right? Because they're not feeling the things that we would feel. If we think about when we first felt arousal as, young children, it was like the sight of a teen magazine or reading something, pretty vanilla in Cosmo, or like looking at a girl's chest would like get you excited. And now the threshold for dopamine is just higher and higher and higher. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like it's only going to get worse. And I don't know if it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think that in Western society, there seems to be a rebellion against AI. It's already happening. We're already seeing this all over Instagram. People are pushing back on it. So all we can hope for is that the education and the awareness trumps the AI progression, right? Like I know for me, if I were to be a parent, that would be, I would lead with the educational component and connection and give them a really realistic framework of like what could happen down tier A versus tier B. And like, do you want to feel the most? Because I know I do. Like, here's how to feel the most. And the problem is you have this whole generation of kids that had no sex positive education, whose parents and educators, teachers, adults did not talk to them about sex. So again, only went to porn. So it's still in the undercurrents of society. So then that's all they know. But it's our responsibility as the adults and of the previous generation where we didn't have these AI tools and we didn't have access to that, to then educate the younger generations that only have access to that.
The adult industry, do they have a requirement to basically tell people when you watch an adult film that this isn't real, this isn't how you should approach your partner to have sex? that this is a fantasy? Because it seems like society, you watch Fast and the Furious and you know you don't drive like that.
Yes,
But people
yeah.
watch adult movies and they think that that's normal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, David Lay, who's an incredible sexologist and psychologist, and he says that. He makes that exact Fast and Furious reference. And so the difference is in Fast and Furious, like parents talk to their kids about driving and how to drive, right? And they
Right.
teach them too. They don't teach them or talk to them about how to have sex and how to connect. So that's where assumptions then lie, and then kids fill in the gaps with only what they see from porn. So that's again our faults. And it's same to go with it's like violence in films, right? It's like you don't see someone getting shot in a film and think, oh, now the kid's not thinking, oh, I'm going to go kill someone. But because porn is just, and sex is just not talked about, it's so feared because we made it so feared. And that goes back into, you know, from Adam and Eve to all forms of religion to the current day. So we've had so much generational shame around this. And now that there's been so many technological progressions, we can't have that anymore. We've got to keep up. We've got to catch up. We've got to change the way we interact and we interface because technology is only going to get crazier and crazier. So it's up to us to then change our scripts, our societal scripts around sex and stop making it bad. Stop making it bad for our kids.
A person with intimacy issues, are they like, I hope this doesn't sound bad, almost like an alcoholic? Will they always have intimacy issues that they have to work on constantly, or will they be cured?
Definitely not. It's not a pathological or chronic thing. Most people just don't have any awareness of where those intimacy issues come from. And it's actually way more simple than we make it to be. It all comes from our attachment. And our attachment forms with our primary caregivers. So, generally mom and dad, or whoever your primary caregivers were in the first 3 years of our lives. So, you need presence from both parents. You need both parents to be attuning to you. And that's how you develop secure attachment. So it's like they mirror emotions back to you. They respond to you as a baby when you don't have the ability to express your full self. And if you don't have that, if dad takes off and you only have mom and mom's working, or, dad isn't emotionally there, right? That's where insecure attachment forms. And then that's where you become avoidant or you become anxious or fearful avoidant. And those are the three insecure attachment styles. And that's the origin of everyone's intimacy issues. Like it's really quite simple. And the work now to deprogram yourself from that is simple, but it's hard. And you really have to change limiting beliefs in order to reprogram yourself around that. So lots of people like to talk about, they psychoanalyze themselves till the cows go home and like, oh, I'm this way, I'm avoidant, I'm anxious, and I'm this way because my dad did this, or my mom did that, and blah blah blah. But no one actually wants to talk about the behavior changes or do the hard thing. It's this existential kink that we have, that it feels safer to experience the pain that we've always felt, the pain versus the pain of the unknown, or the potential pain of the unknown. So once you realize that, and that fear is a complete illusion, and these intimacy scripts we're telling ourselves are all up here. They're not chronic issues, and we just have to recondition ourselves and make different choices. And if you do that, like you go to the gym, if you want to, lose 10 pounds instead of taking the Ozempic, it doesn't take long. You can repattern your attachment and then therefore change your entire trajectory of your relationships and your intimacy wounding within a matter of months if you're willing to do the work. Where we get lost is in the story of what happened to us. But the story, can be a pretty innocuous event. Like in my case, my dad was a touring rock musician. He was away for weeks at a time as soon as I was born. So I learned to equate love with distance, longing, yearning. And full presence from a man was terrifying for me. And I could never figure out why, because my dad's amazing. We're thick as thieves. I love him. We're very close. My parents are still together. And he would come back and he would have a hard time kind of integrating back into the family and felt kind of awkward because he'd been away. And then I would mirror that back to him, and I felt tense and awkward. And I don't always want to make sure that I was never a dramatic child because he was only around for a limited period of time. So, I would always be on my best behavior and, making jokes and people pleasing in any way. And then that showed up in my relationships. I would choose unavailable men because I put my father up on a pedestal too. I didn't experience him as a whole flawed human being, and I filled in the gaps with fantasy. And that's what we tend to do with our parents, right? Traditionally, it's like mom is the Medusa and dad is up on the pedestal, although it's interchangeable. And then that shapes our patterning when it's like the reality is both of our parents were whole flawed individuals and we didn't see them 24 hours a day. We didn't see what they were like in relationship to each other, relationship to others. So it's, this otherwise innocuous thing, I come from a good family, then had a ripple effect throughout my attachment in my entire life. And I developed fearful avoidance, which is when I had a deep yearning for intimacy and I would get really excited by someone, but I would choose the unavailable, whether that was a man who lived in another country, or he was newly sober and he wasn't allowed to be dating, or he was significantly younger or older than me. Just anything to make him unavailable was like what got me excited, because that was my repeating of my childhood wounding. And I was looking to resolve that subconsciously. So most people exist their entire lives living through that time and time and time again on that same loop, having no awareness. And as soon as you bring awareness to that, then your whole life makes sense and you're able to take control of it.
And very quickly, in terms of relationships with intimacy, does age matter? Like if someone's 30 and they're dating someone that's 50, in terms of intimacy, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Does it make a difference how old the difference is?
Um, I think generally my rule of thumb is like 30 and above, you're fully formed at that point. Um, and that's definitely what I've seen reflected back into the real world. Where I see it gets tricky is the, men that chronically date 25 and under as they continue to age, the Leo DiCaprio thing. It's like, well, why? I'd understand, mind you, if the women that they date range in age. And it's like, okay, she just happens to be 25, but the ex-girlfriend was 30. The next girlfriend's 36. The other, then sure. In my experience, I dated someone last year, I'm 36, who was 10 years younger than me. And he was exponentially wiser and more evolved than the men that I had dated mostly in my age realm. Mind you, he had also been through some trauma that expedited his growth. I do think that if you were a child that experienced some capital T trauma, then that accounts for some wisdom. So you go through things in life that most people take them 30 years to go through. You go through that in your first, 10 years of life, then you're going to be a lot more mature and be able to match someone on a different level. So if it's a pathological thing, and then yeah, I think that that's a problem. And generally what I see, that's men avoiding being seen, because if they're dating a younger woman all the time, there's two reason that's happening. Either they're being put up on a pedestal by this younger woman, because he's able to provide. Everything that he's saying is more interesting. He has bigger status, more money. So it's like he's always up here. Or, the younger woman is not worthy of commitment. So it's easy to just keep churning them around. It's like, well, she's going to just outgrow me anyway. So she's going to leave anyway. So I'm just going to get another young one. So it just keeps you in this kind of stagnant place without ever actually having to grow and be seen. Again, I don't think it's like a fixed thing, but if it's a pattern, it's definitely very revealing. And I've seen, I had actually an ex of mine who had a thing for older women. And that's because he had been taken advantage of by his stepmother at one point when he was of age, but it was obviously wrong. And so he fetishized that and he only went for older women, right? And that can also be wrong. And it's not wrong because of him. It's wrong because he's not choosing it because of the connection. He's choosing it because of his patterning. And then this same person, same ex of mine, came to me and he said, "What do you think about me dating an 18-year-old?" And I was like, "Okay, well, let's talk about that." And we got to the origin of why that is. And it's because his mother recently passed away. She was an addict. He went from having this older women thing for the longest time because it was him, replaying his mother wound, looking for answers unconsciously. And then now he wants to date an exponentially younger woman because he doesn't have to be seen that way. He hasn't resolved his mom stuff. So by dating a woman who's 18, she's going to put him up on this pedestal. He's seen as heroic and idealized, and he doesn't actually have to do the work to match someone on the same level of as intimacy as he actually needs, right? So it's a way of not actually doing the work and growing. And he was like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Then the other side of that, where men put women on such a high pedestal, and men aren't supposed to, less attractive men are not supposed to go after what we call the UB, which is the unobtainable babe.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
different from masculinity? Is that
So that brings up an interesting point that, all we're hearing right now is these dating app stats on how, what is it? 80% of women go after 20% of men, and like men have to swipe something like 60 times or more to get one match, right? But we're failing to educate both sexes around that because if we look at our evolutionary theory, men are single cued sexually, like I said. So men are swiping because they're looking at a beautiful eyes, great set of tits. They're not reading the profile. The average spent that a man reads on a dating profile compared to a woman, I think it's a 6-second difference. Women are assessing for partnership. Like that's how we are drawn sexually, right? We're assessing for long-term mating, even when we're attracted to someone. It's not short-term. So when we're looking at that data, it's like, oh, poor men, this is so hard. It's like, well, a man's swiping because he wants to get laid, and that's not bad. And that might not even be conscious. He's just like, attractive thing, attractive thing, attractive thing. But that doesn't mean anything about his worth as a partner, nor does it mean a woman is a bitch or has impossibly high standards because she's swiping for completely different
right?
motivations. So there's no language around that. And all we're hearing is this super sensationalist data. And then it's like we're reaching this impasse where it's like, oh, women have these, insane expectations of men these days. And then also conversely, men are like, oh, we're so misunderstood and we're so lonely. And it's like, well, our motives are completely different. So let's just talk about that. And unfortunately, the dating apps that started as relationship dating apps have just turned into hookup apps. And everyone's just unconsciously, it's a numbers game with no awareness at all whatsoever of like what the intent behind it is. So, this goes back to technology and AI. Like before we get carried away with all these stats and data on the loneliness epidemic, I'd like to say that we're in a human loneliness epidemic, and women feel again because they came from such a repressed culture for so long. Now we've doubled down where we're like we're hyper independent, and we can have casual sex too. We can be detached too, which is also not in our innate nature. And that's not
Right.
liberation, right? We shouldn't be doubling down in the other direction. Again, men and women are fundamentally different. We should not be trying to be like the other. And so men feel like they need to be, that they're being asked to be more vulnerable, but then women can't accept their vulnerability, which is kind of true. It's like we demand that of men, but we don't know how to process that at all. We're not communicating what we actually want. We haven't caught up on that yet.
Is there any data that suggests that I've been in the adult business for 40 years? I've dealt with a lot of performers and a lot of different things. In my opinion, I think at the end of the day, people are just looking for people to like them for who they are.
Yeah.
When you meet a porn star, you have these sexual thoughts in your head that all of this, you forget that there's a person there. And I was just curious if there's any data, like when people go on dating sites for women, like, are you generally looking for a person to like you for who you are, at the end of the day, you turn out the lights, everybody's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we'd like to say that's what it is. And I think that's our underneath our deep yearning. But I think once we get on that app and it becomes a dopamine fixation, it's about validation. It's not about connection, right? And so my only piece is if you really actually care to meet someone, similar to what I say about porn and not just like either or, diversify your access to people and your encounters with people. So don't make it exclusively online with dating apps and don't make it exclusively in the real world. Like, why don't you try hedging your bets a little and try both and be really intentional about dating apps. Like, you're not trying to look cool. The whole point is to actually not look cool. The whole point is like, let's get to the thing faster
Yeah.
by getting as much of our authentic selves across as we possibly can in this tiny little profile, right? So I use this thing that I had when I had a dating app. I made a husband bingo card where it was a bingo card, and in every square I had things like um, believes in monogamy, or like ambivert, or not, I don't feel like going out, but you should, or and like their star sign. So I played in like playful parts with actual like fundamental political beliefs and wove that in. So it was a way to bring up what was important to me in a playful context, which with also like expressing that I am a playful person and like yes, these things are serious to me, but also levity is also important. So rather than like, you know, so many people don't even have anything on their profile. It's just photos. We've all been on dates before where we see someone, online and then we meet them in person and they've gone from one dimensional to three dimensional and we feel nothing. They looked incredible in that photo and it's like we don't even have a pulse when we meet them in person, or we have a serious aversion to them and feel really uncomfortable. And then conversely, we meet people out in the wild where it's like that's not my type. And then our response to them is like primal, And there's this
Yeah.
energy that we would have never been able to read on a screen. And interestingly, I find this with men a lot. Um, Men are conditioned and they take a lot of that evolutionary theory as like dogma. And here, well, we're not monogamous and we're not once a woman's fertility starts declining when she hits, 30, then she's no longer attractive. And that's what their conditioning it tells them. And that's not actually quite their biological conditioning so much as that what we're being told through like all this evolutionary psychology that we're ingesting constantly. It's like they're taught to believe that. That's the masculine way. But what I find is a lot of these men will start then dating the, 21-year-old and then they'll get fucking bored. And I see this happen time and time again. These men end up becoming my clients. A lot of them are my friends where it's like, oh, this is like high status. I'm like to date the young 21-year-old, and that makes me look good and look cool. And like, yeah, she's young and fertile and hot. And then they flatline and they're like, what's happening? And then they're so confused because they're like, why aren't I getting aroused? Why aren't you getting excited? I'm not stimulated because they're not stimulated intellectually. They're not stimulated, in their mind, their body, and their soul. So like stimulation is again multifaceted. So it's like you can get the arousal that can be but that's going to have a short-term shelf life if it's just based in physicality. So that's another thing with these dating apps. It's like men will look because they're conditioned to. I'm not faulting them for it. That's how society is trained them to be, plus their evolutionary makeup as well. So they're just looking at young, hot, pretty, right? And so we really need to change just the scripts around this because then what happens is, yeah, they meet in person, they might even date for a few months, and then people get bored. They get bored. And then more often than not, I see, men and women go full circle. And women do this too. They'll do this with like, what's his job? How much money is he making? That's the equivalent, right? Both are equally offensive to one another. So, and this is why I hear a lot of men then go to younger women because younger women aren't as jaded and they seem easier to impress. and win over than older women that are like, he needs to, be 6'2", have this much in the bank, blah, 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 blah. And then those are kind of impossible standards to have all at once at the same time. And the truth is, like, we should be growing in relationship and building with each other. Let's find someone that we want to build with because, God, I don't ever want to meet someone that's done growing and building. Like we're expecting to meet perfect people. No one's perfect.
Very quick, are you starting a podcast in July, or are you working on one?
Yeah, yeah. So I've recorded 6 episodes. It's called The Next Man Up, and it's coming out mid-July, knock on wood. And it's me talking to men about the misconceptions around masculinity and what we're told versus what their lived experience is. So I talk to, and a really candid dialogue. I talk to men who are everything from relationship therapists to male porn stars to comedians to adulterers who are major athletes, to psychologists. So I just get their lived experience as well as what brought them to the work that they're doing and how paradoxical it is. We don't like to, when we think of masculinity, we think of one-dimensional masculinity, which is just stoicism and providership and protection. And it's like those words are all entirely subjective. And what it means to provide means it doesn't just mean monetarily, right? Like providing can be just providing safety. And that's the biggest thing is I think men are throwing the baby out with the bathwater a lot of these days because we've had 12 new wave feminist movements in 10 years. And then we look at the, LGBTQ and like trans movements that we've had. It's no wonder that cisgender, heterosexual men feel like they were kind of left behind. And then now it's like, well, how are we defining masculinity? We've redefined feminism about 1,000 times ways and different shapes and forms. But what have we done for masculinity? It's not just one thing. There shouldn't be one perception of masculinity. So my whole objective with this podcast is to understand men better and help women to understand men better and also men to better understand themselves. Like some of the most incredible masculine men, in my opinion, come in completely unconventional packaging. Like whether that is the male porn star, that's had unconventional experiences, but respects women in a way that is unmatched in the real world. Or, the former adulterer who didn't learn his wounding until he had been busted, and that's or had learned, the author that plagiarized his work and then was outed for that. And it's like in their own hero's journey, what led them to their purpose and what led them to the men that they are today. And um, it's always someone's pain and adversity and the things that make them feel unloved and unwanted that make them the most beautiful. And that's where their power and, sovereignty really lies. It's not in these conventional casings of like biohacking and being a certain height and having a
Right.
certain, BMI or making X amount of money. It's like I have seen men from all different walks of life that are incredible and come from all different origins that are incredible. And, conventional masculinity doesn't have language around that. So I'm trying to shed light to that.
The podcast, will there be an app? Is there a website? How can people find it?
Yeah, it'll be on Spotify and on YouTube. And then at the Next Man Up pod on Instagram.
Do you have a website? Do you have platforms?
Yep. Coral Osborne, CoralOsborne.com is my website. And then I just launched my Substack yesterday. So it's just /Coral Osborne. And then my Instagram as well, which I thread all my content through, which is at the Unreal Coral Osborne.
If people want to hire you for your services, is there a website? Is there an email, something?
Yeah, I mean, my email, which is contact@coralosborne.com.
After you did the sex work and you started this amazing journey, is there any part of this that amazes you, surprises you, shocks you? You did it, you didn't expect it, you
All of it. All of it. I am never, ever done learning. I am constantly surprised, and enamored and excited by what I learn of humans and the human condition and spirituality and connection and intimacy. I'll never be done, ever.
simulate aside. Is there anything coming up that you can talk about? As most people in Hollywood say something, but they can't talk about it.
I know, I know. There's lots of stuff I can't talk about. Um, I'm trying to think what I can talk about. I am well, yeah, I'm going to be on a pretty well-known manosphere red pill podcast soon, in a debate format. And for those of you that aren't familiar with like the manosphere, it's men that believe traditionally, that men are kind of the superior sex. And there's a lot of truth if you're looking at physicality of that. And so women have made the manosphere and the red pill community really bad, but it's rooted in evolutionary psychology and biology. So I use a lot of that in my work as well. There are fundamental truths to how men and women are. And as soon as we have awareness of that, of what we're prone to doing, is when we can transcend with agency in relationships. So I've been talking to this individual, the leader of the space, for quite some time, and we have come up with a framework where we wanted to talk about like working together and finding middle ground, so to make both sides understand each other better. And then I've also been asked to be a part of this documentary that's about men paying for sex. And I can't say much more than that, but it's been 3 years in the making, and it's a beautiful reclamation of a journey from shame to liberation for men who have had experience with paying for sex, whether that was sex workers or porn or infidelity in any way. So I'm really excited to contribute to that project, and it's going to be at Sundance this year.
And all that amazing stuff aside, is there a dream project for you? Is there a dream person to talk to you on the podcast? Is there
Yeah, I mean, uh, a couple for the podcast. Dream guest Nick Cave, because I think that as an artist, he puts everything into incredible perspective and alchemizes pain in a beautiful, beautiful way. He's a male role model I think would be great. And then Scott Galloway, I think he also is brilliant at bringing awareness to the paradox of masculinity and does it in a really humorous, light way that makes him so likable and makes everything he says so digestible. And then Andrew Tate, because I think I could change his mind. And um, the silver lining of having done sex work is I have a really large capacity for understanding and wanting others to be understood as well. So that would be my dream for the podcast. And then I'm actually also working on a book proposal right now, which uses all the various archetypes of men I met doing sex work. And I do a psychosexual analysis of what brought them there into the room in the first place and what they wanted to extrapolate from the experience of sex work. And then also how women can better understand why they were there in the first place.
and with this crazy crazy amount of information and stuff. You've never thought about having an OF account or doing anything. It doesn't have to be sexual. I mean, the whole
Having a
thing is
what?
a OnlyFans account. One of these
Oh,
platforms.
I
These,
joke. I joke about this all the time. A couple of my very best girlfriends are top tier creators. I think I'm a little old for it, as I say. So I would. It seems to me right place, right time would have been the move, but because I work with men and you know, it's important to me that they don't get distracted from that. Not to say that I don't believe in bringing sexuality to my work with them. Like if it, I often get this feedback of like, well, you're an attractive sexologist. Like, how the hell are you supposed to work with men that have sex issues? And I'm like, well, I work with that tension, and that tension is kind of the best piece that I work with. So rather than them denying that part, it's like, okay, do you feel the need to, are you trying to manipulate me in some way? Are you trying to get me to like you? Are you trying to get me to validate you? Like, what is that piece? What's coming up? And let's workshop that. So for that reason, I don't think having OnlyFans is the best business decision for me. Do I think about it often? And like, what, like in a perfect world, could I do that to fund all my business endeavors and also like as a radical reclamation of my own sexuality because I am a total exhibitionist? Yes, but sometimes we do have to choose, and that's something I don't think I'll be doing in the near future. But huge fan. Lots of my girlfriends are and guy friends are creators, and they've done exceptionally well. And I think as someone that uh, is a rather A-type individual, I have to do exceptionally well at things. And it's a lot easier for me to do exceptionally well at what I'm already doing than OnlyFans,
mm,
given the market. Yeah.